Welcome to Coffee Break with Rachel V. Hill, taking a daily look at the biggest stories in Denver sports and interacting live with you, the Coffee Break fam. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of joe, and enjoy your coffee break. Here's your host, Rachel V. Hill.
Well, there's a new name that has been added to the Denver Broncos staff, and he's going to be working alongside GM George Paton. And that is a name we actually heard in the interview process for head coach Sean Payton's job. And it's David Shaw. He's obviously very known for his collegiate career and the success that he had. But it opens up the question of, has George Paton gained any more respect from Broncos country with any of these new additions? And so I'm excited because he's actually back from vacation. But we got Will Peterson in the house to sit down and talk a little bit about our favorite guy, George Paton. How are you, Will?
I am doing well, Rachel. It is good to be back. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. Okay, so let's get into it. So David Shaw obviously added. We know they added somebody back in January, Cody Rager. What does this make you think about what George Paton's doing right now?
Well, you posed the question, has George Paton gained any more respect? Well, he doesn't have a time machine, so he can't undo trading for Russell Wilson, giving Russell Wilson the worst contract in NFL history, and of course, hiring Nathaniel Hackett. Three massive blunders that you have to wonder, if it was not a quote-unquote new ownership group, would he still have a job? A lot of NFL owners would not put up with that. I see you have a point, so I'll let you get in.
I do have a point. Real quick, you say three huge mistakes. Two of them, massive mistakes, and I'm totally with you. But trading for Russell Wilson, I do not think can be a mistake for George Paton, because everybody thought that Russell Wilson was going to be the guy that we saw in Seattle. So I believe you were very hyped about it. A lot of people in our office were very hyped. So I don't think you can say that's a mistake. The contract, absolutely a mistake. Hiring Nathaniel Hackett because you thought you were going to get Aaron Rodgers at some point, a mistake. But I don't think you can say trading for Russell Wilson was a mistake.
Well, he's paid millions of dollars to make correct decisions moving forward. That's what GMs do, right? So he obviously didn't make a correct decision in trading for Russell Wilson. So if someone wants to pay me $3 million to play fantasy football in real life, I will take accountability if I make really bad decisions. That's what George Paton did. And okay, another point for Rachel. Another point.
Have you ever won your fantasy football league?
Yes, a couple of times.
Okay. I just need to make sure we won a couple before we advance you to GM over here for an NFL team. Continue.
Okay, here's the other thing in that. You say no one. Rachel, you remember everyone we talked to from Seattle? They told us to proceed with caution, and we shot them all down because we were just drinking the Kool-Aid. Like, I remember Brock Heward, who's like super well known. He's on Fox's college football broadcast all the time. He's with our partner Seattle Sports up there in the Northwest, and he warned us. He's like, this guy's kind of a diva, and he's kind of a handful, and he's a lot to deal with. And we're all like, no, he's fine. We all dismissed it, and I find myself doing the same thing to folks in Pittsburgh. I went on a show in Pittsburgh not too long ago, and they're all hyped, and they're all drinking the Kool-Aid, and I'm like, I am telling you guys what Seattle tried to tell Denver. Like, this comes with a huge proceed with caution warning sign in Russell Wilson. So don't say no one said it was a mistake. There were plenty of folks in Seattle who were happy to move on from Russell Wilson.
Wait, I want to know, what questions did they ask you out there in Pittsburgh? Like, what got started on the Russell Wilson talk?
Well, they just kept bringing up the stats last year, and they're like, this guy had good stats. It's 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and they're blaming it all on Sean Payton out in Pittsburgh. They're just like, well, Sean Payton's such a jerk that he couldn't work with this guy. He put up numbers. It was the defense's fault. They gave up 70 points in Miami, and they're all saying that Russ can still play, and it's Sean's fault. And I'm trying to warn them, when you're benching Russell Wilson for Justin Fields in week 6, I'm going to be the guy that said, I told you so.
Whoa. Well, first of all, that's so fascinating to hear about what was going on, out there and what they're saying and how it's all Sean Payton's fault. Like, I can see how you can do that, right? Because we all saw what Russell Wilson did in Seattle. Like you mentioned, we did the exact same thing to the folks in Seattle. It's interesting, though, to now be on the other side of it and hear a different city be like, no, it's all the head coach. It's all that kind of stuff. That's interesting. I'm really fascinated on that Kool-Aid they're drinking.
But they've been looking for their replacement since Ben Roethlisberger retired, right? And Kenny Pickett wasn't the guy. What was Broncos country looking for? Their replacement since Peyton Manning retired. So that's just the natural flow of NFL fans is if you don't have a quarterback, you're always going to talk yourself into the next one. And believe me, Steelers fans are talking themselves into Russell Wilson. It was an interesting interview, no doubt.
Well, we're going to learn. Either James Marilat's going to be right and Russell Wilson's going to go on and be successful with another team and Sean Payton's not going to be, or we're going to see maybe both struggle, or maybe both will do well and they just weren't the right fit for each other. I think it's going to be interesting, but we'll bring it back to George Paton, David Shaw, Cody Reader, that whole conversation, because I feel like I'm like, okay, I got to give it to George Paton a little bit. Like, he's hiring other people to help him. But all it does is make me go back to Nathaniel Hackett when, they ended up hiring Jerry Rossberger to be like, oh, he's just coming in to, like help out the team and watch over stuff and all that kind of jazz. And I'm like, that's what I feel like George Paton is doing right now. He's bringing in other people to like help out and look over things when in fact it's more like a quote unquote babysitter in a way.
Yeah, it was kind of funny to me that Mike Kliss, who we love, he's a 104.3 The Fan insider. I'm friends with Mike. I worked with Mike for 3 years. But he positioned it as George Paton hired David Shaw. And then the Broncos, when they announced it, also positioned it as George Paton hired David Shaw. And it's like, why are we trying to give George Paton this credit as like, oh, he's still the GM, he's hiring people? Rachel, this is the Broncos making a conscious effort to not have everyone think, oh, Sean Payton's the boss over there. Sean Payton's making all the decisions. This was very strategic in the way they framed this, but I have a different take on it. My take on it is they are auditioning people to take George Payton's job. You mentioned Cody Reader from the Saints that came over in January. Now David Shaw clearly leaving coaching and going more to personnel. I mean, would it shock you if a year from now, or once football season ends, 6-7 months from now, that you and I are sitting here talking about new Broncos GM Cody Reader or new Broncos GM David Shaw? No, because I have the feeling that this is bringing in other people that can ultimately replace George one day. So you know what they say, like when someone comes in and does your same job and they go, oh, you need to train them. Well, that's code for once they know how to do your job, they're going to fire you. So
you're not wrong. That's for sure.
If they bring in a new video host tomorrow and say, Rachel, why don't you train him or her? You might want to start like, I'm kidding. But my point is serious in the sense that like that is a thing that happens in every industry across the spectrum. And to me, this doesn't reek of George Paton gaining more respect or George Paton, adding to his staff because he's going to be here the next 5 to 10 years. To me, seems George Payton's replacements are getting brought in the building a year before George gets fired.
You and I are totally on the same page when it comes to this, so I like it. But I also just wonder, like, why do we care? Because it's so clear who's running everything down there. It's Sean Payton. So, like, why does it matter who is technically the GM when Sean Payton is going to act as the GM? Yeah, maybe he doesn't have to make the mean phone calls to an agent about, Russell Wilson or whatever it was going to be, and now we look ahead. But, like, Sean Payton's running the whole thing down there. Let's be honest. You and I both know that. So really, George Payton's just picking up the phone every once in a while. I didn't even see George out there for OTAs or minicamp.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that kind of makes my point even ring more true. The Broncos are trying to change that narrative, right? They're not going to change it. You and I know we speak truth here on this show. When I'm on with you, you do it every single day. Intelligent Broncos fans know Sean Payton is running the show.
Yeah.
But the Broncos are definitely trying to make the casual fan think, oh, yeah, that GM, he's still got a lot of power. I just thought it was funny how it was framed, that it was George Paton hiring David Shaw. I promise you this went across Greg Penner's desk. Remember, both Craig and Kerry Walton Penner have advanced degrees from Stanford. They interviewed David Shaw as one of their 8 candidates in 2023. They took David Shaw very seriously. It wasn't, to fulfill the Rooney Rule, which we don't have to get into the Rooney Rule debate, but that was not the case. Like, David Shaw was in the running for this job. They also interviewed D'Amico Ryan, so they interviewed multiple African-American head coaching candidates. And at the end of the day, they settled on Sean Payton, but David Shaw was in that mix. Let's not get that twisted. So if Greg and Kerry already liked David Shaw, and he's looking for a gig after leaving Stanford and not coaching last year, then I think this was more of an ownership hire than strictly a George Paton hire.
So it's so funny because now I'm thinking back to Mike Kliss's tweet in his article, and it says, like, David Shaw stayed in contact with Payton over the last year. And now I just keep going back to you like, no, the Broncos are trying to get across the point that George Paton is the one that hired him. And now that's just what's sticking out in my head.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me that they want us all to think that George still has power over there. George doesn't have power in that building. You know, his power in that building? Pretty much 3 people: Greg, Kerry, and Sean. Those are the 3 people running the show over there. George is lower on the totem pole. And I said it 5 minutes ago, it would not surprise me if 6-7 months from now, we are talking about Broncos general manager David Shaw.
Okay, so then let's go back to this. If, say they do move on from George Paton, which obviously I'm assuming would happen at the end of the season. I thought it was going to happen after the draft. I thought they were going to be done. Does it even matter who is really the GM because Sean Payton needs to be so in control? Or do you think it's just not the right fit with George Paton right now? And like he would loosen the reins a little bit if there was another GM?
It's a great question. I don't think Sean's changing for anyone, right? Like I think you could bring in the best GM in football and Sean's still going to tinker, but Sean still has a free pass for now. Yeah. But what about if they go 3-14, 4-13 this year, Rachel? Then is Greg going to say, dude, your job is to coach the team. Yeah. And the GM's job is to build the team. And maybe that's when Greg has to come in and sort of tighten the reins on Sean and make sure that he knows there's a coach and there's a GM, and he's not both.
Is he so strategic that he's looking at Russell Wilson was my scapegoat year 1. Year 2, it can be George Paton in case this team falls apart and I need more time to build it. Like, that's crazy if that's the case.
I don't think you're wrong, though. I mean, I told anyone who would listen, I told you, I told the guys on the fan that there was 3 scapegoats in 2023, right? They were Russ, VJ, and George, right? Yeah. He let go of Russ, but he kept himself 2 scapegoats. I think some of us thought, oh, all 3 will get fired. But no, he just fired the quarterback. And now, if things go wrong in 2024, he can fire the defensive coordinator or he can fire the GM. And maybe he hangs on to one of them so he has someone else to fire in 2025.
Wait, that is so crazy. I feel like we just talked ourselves down this like loophole. I'm just like, oh my gosh. This is just like, I mean, and Sean Payton, he's so what's the word I want to use? Like, not thoughtful. Thoughtful is not the one, but that's what's coming to my mind. But like, there's strategic. There is such a plan in place that I feel like people don't assume, but like he's so smart at the exact same time. Like, we can give Sean Payton as much crap as we want to. The man is very, very smart. So us talking through this plan, I'm like, I could totally see this happening. Like I could just see it. There has to be a scapegoat. He has to know that. And yeah, there's 2 easy targets still on this Denver Broncos team. And that's why you bring in, I believe his last name's Carmichael, right? He's working on this defensive side. I don't know his actual title right now, but in case VJ goes on, he can move up the ladder so quickly.
Well, don't forget about Jim Leonard too, right? Jim Leonard's now here as well. And he had to have some sort of surgery. So he was out of football last year. He's back too. So it's actually funny you bring that up because it reminds me of this who's in the building already that could replace George. Now it's who's in the building already that could replace VJ. There are multiple candidates for both GM and defensive coordinator. But yeah, I mean, if they have a bad year, which we're all predicting they're going to have a bad – heck, Vegas predicting they're going to have a bad year, 5.5 wins, then someone's got to get fired. I mean, you can't just roll out of bed, go 5-12, and no one gets fired. But will it be George? Will it be VJ? Will it be both? But it's certainly going to be one. It's not going to be neither. I'll tell you that.
Is there also another scapegoat on this team, and it's still the quarterbacks of like, oh, Jared Stidham just wasn't the guy, but Bo Nix wasn't ready yet?
I mean, perhaps, but then that gets us into the rabbit hole of does Nix have to play this year? Or is Sean going to be strategic? Let's go back to that word and play Stidham the first 10, 11, 12 games. So even if Nick stinks it up the last 5 games, he can say, well, we just didn't have a big enough sample size and he's going to be our guy next year. Like Sean, I think what we're getting at here is Sean is really good at buying himself time. And I think it's going to make fans want to pull their hair out if Jarrett Stidham is the guy. But if you're Sean, you can make Stidham the guy, and then that buys you a whole nother year with Nix. Because if he only plays 4 or 5 games, then you can just pull the, well, we didn't see enough. That's why we're all banging the drum, and I'm banging it. We have to see Bo Nix for 17 games. And if you're not going to let me see him for 17, I'll meet you at like 12 or 13. But come week 4, week 5, Bo Nix has to be the starter, and I prefer it to be week 1.
I don't remember who I was having the conversation with. It was either James Merrilat or Cecil Lammey. I can't remember. But we were having the conversation of like, maybe it was James. And he was like, do we really want to go see Bo Nix out there in Seattle and then come back here and face Russell Wilson against Pittsburgh and like all of these things? And he's going through like the first 4 weeks, you know, fly down to Tampa, deal with the humidity. Like, is that the right environment for him to start in? And I'm like, that's better than the month of November when they're going to face the Ravens and the Chiefs, and it's just going to be a nightmare of a scenario. So I'm like, start them off against those teams instead of waiting until November where you're going to be facing, teams that are probably going to be deep in the playoff run, if not Super Bowl contenders this year.
Yeah, I mean, there's no good time to insert him. Like, James is on this, play him against Carolina week 8 or week 9 because Carolina's the only team in the league worse than you. And it's like, okay, but then you're right. Then you have that brutal Baltimore KC stretch coming up later in the schedule. So, yeah, I don't buy this whole we have to make sure it's the perfect conditions for Bo. Like, screw it. If he's going to be the quarterback that ultimately gets you back in the conversation with Patrick Mahomes, then he won't be intimidated by playing week 1 in Seattle or, the big, bad, scary humidity in Tampa Bay. Come on. How soft are we that if Bo Nix is ultimately the guy to end this playoff drought, then he's not scared of playing at Lumen Field, and he's not scared of playing the Bucs at Raymond James with the pirate ship shooting off cannons and it's hot as heck. I mean, come on. Like, we can't make everything perfect. This is the NFL. This is pro freaking football. I don't care if Carolina at home looks like the best game for Bo. Let's get him in the fire early, and let's do it September 8th in Seattle.
Listen, I think we need to send Will Peterson to go golfing every other week because he is fired up calling people soft, and I love it. And it welcomes us into our conversation for tomorrow's show. Everybody, make sure you tune in. What does Bo Nix need to do to be the franchise guy this season? That is going to do it for today's episode of Coffee Break. Will Peterson, you were excellent today, my friend.
Tried to bring it, Rachel. I take 3 days of PTO, and you act like I've been gone for a month.
Whoo, that golf, though, it's bringing the fire. Hopefully your golf game was as good as it was for today's show. I appreciate you. And to everybody in the comments, thanks for hanging out with us on this Thursday, and we will see you guys tomorrow. Bye, everybody.